Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us for today's industry talk. Today we have Oliver Creel with us from Foxy Games. He's going to take us through some art. Take it away.
Okay. So, as Emma introduced me, I'm Oliver. I work at Foxy Games. I'm their creative lead art director. So yeah, I've got 30 minutes to rush through possibly somebody's journey in art, what you probably experience. I'll just touch on a few things. There's no way I'll be able to go into deeply, but feel free to ask questions at any point. So I'll just jump through it. Me personally, I really like traditional art. I like pencil work, but for games and stuff like that, we generally work digitally. But it's nice to have that, to be able to bring something outside of games sometimes into games. It's just nice to have that personality. You can bring something fresh and different to games versus just living in the digital space. Hopefully you can follow what I'm saying on that. So, who am I? So I'll just give you a rundown of who I am so you can hopefully trust and believe what I'm saying. So just a quirky intro is just that I'm basically a failed perfectionist because I have really high standards but I'm not able to meet them myself. So what I've done is because I've got a logical thinking side of my brain, I just make the commercial benchmark, the commercial line my benchmark, what I can achieve. So as long as whatever we create, myself or my freelancers, if it crosses that commercial benchmark, it's good because you can tend to sometimes sit down and get stuck on something for too long, which just trying to fine tune it, and that's going to slow down your momentum. So it's good to have a keen eye, but just remember, just keep momentum going. So. And probably as an artist, you'll I don't know, I'm OCD, like, technically, like, I have OCD. So most artists will refer themselves as perfectionists because you'll try to get something to look great. There is a difference between just aspiring for perfectionism and actually having it. So maybe you won't be able to really complete what I'm saying, but yeah, just keep that in mind as an artist. Momentum. There's that saying which hopefully you guys have heard of. It's fail faster. Anybody heard that saying before? Okay, so the quicker you fail, the quicker you learn. But if you're someone like me that has true perfectionism, like true OCD, you don't even want to start because you can't, how can I say, deal with the loss. But you need to make losses to get gains. All right, so. I was a 3D animation graduate in Cape Town at Universal Computer Arts Academy. I then jumped into graphic design because money was better. In Cape Town, it just was that was the setup. Money was better. It's no longer no longer the equation. Depends which country in. That was quite a rare case. Doing graphic design was paying more than doing visual effects in game, which is bananas. But that was the case. So I jumped into graphic design. I was in that industry for about 7 years, maybe 9. Became the art director in that industry, doing logo design, and then I started migrating over to character design and illustration, and then I migrated over to motion graphic animation, and then I went into UI art, and I got a job doing art manager at Foxy Games, and then art directing for them as well. I also do concept art for them. I've written the story for 3 of the games, and I also assist with game design. So you can see I'm involved. I struggle to say no. That's basically my problem. That's Mark. He's our UI artist from Foxy.
Hey guys.
Welcome. So I'll just point out the illustrations as we go. So the left is a concept art I did, and the 2 on the right is actually 3D models that have been hand painted. So as you can see, we try to get that hand painted aesthetic and try to get the artist to nail that original concept's feel. Sometimes they'll surpass it, but yeah, that's where that one's from. That's from our game called Wolf Tales. It's a companion you can get. Art director, what's involved? So if that's something you guys want to do down the line, if you want to be an art manager, art director, or if you actually want to never go that route, that's something you have to consider. You might only be able to answer that question once you've worked in the industry for a while. Just off the cuff, working as an art manager, you can still assign work to yourself, which I do. but generally you're painting with people, not with a brush. So you're painting through somebody else. You see what they've created, they're going to bring something to that art piece, but then your experience, you can collaborate with them. So you're still being creatively involved, they're doing the heavy lifting, you're painting with people. So, but you can still assign yourself actual art tasks, because that tends to be the case where you will get hungry to do art. You want to actually get your fingers stuck on this, get your hands dirty. And that's just the nature of it. You will get hungry sometimes as an art director to actually want to get your hands dirty, and you can just assign yourself a task. All right, I'll run through this quicker. So as an art director, you generally dictate the style of the art, depends which company you're working in. So this is quite company specific. So in my case, you dictate the art style of the game. You do a bit of world building from designing how the levels are going to look, what kind of resources there are, try to make the resources thematic, and you cover a lot. So it's kind of a broad artistic view at the project. Once the company's decided what project they want to do, so they want to do a wolf game, we'll sit down and say, okay, what kind of resources can we make? Okay, we want to keep this game quite natural, so maybe the resources will be water, because that's a natural thing. And you want to maybe picking up another animal's scent, maybe that's the sort of currency you get. And you start creating a theme around the actual currency, and you're artistically involved on that level. You're recruiting a team of artists that you'll collaborate with. So recruiting the artists is part of my job. You're negotiating budgets and deadlines. You're writing up briefs for the artists. You're going to have a critical eye and give constructive feedback. Just saying something sucks is not enough. You need to be able to isolate what's broken and then also tell them how to fix it. Basically, so often it's so easy to stand. You can actually look at a masterpiece and you can still give a negative comment. It's the easiest thing in the world to give a negative comment. It's really, really hard to look at something, realize something is not right, isolate what it is, and then also give them the solution. That's constructive feedback. Yep, and just putting commercial line there, you've got to know what the commercial line is. Excuse me. As an individual artist or as an art director, it's very important to know when it's good enough. For two reasons. One, maybe your work isn't good enough and you need to put some more effort in. Or maybe it's good enough to go, but you keep tinkering with it. So it's so important for you to understand what the commercial line is. What's the benchmark? You have to make tough decisions as an art director, where you sometimes have to tell artists that they're not a good fit for the project. You've been working with them for a while, they've been struggling, and you're going to have to go back and work on your skill, and you have to let them go. So that's also part of it. Final quality control is, I've got a whole checklist of things that all the assets that I get given have to go through. I have to just check them all, because I can't just trust that the freelancer or the in-house artist did the job. Generally, the in-house artists I don't have to manage. They, pretty much islands we manage ourselves. It's more the freelancers we have to manage, and yeah, you have to check their work. You can't just trust that they did all the right things. So sometimes I'll think that the freelancer did a great job, it looks all good. When I bring it into Unity, a whole bunch of stuff's broken. And I have to do that before I give it to the programmers. And it really sucks when they do make mistakes, because when you send it back and they give it back to you again, you're going to have to do quality control of it again. Because you can't trust that they didn't break something else, and you have to make sure what they gave you. So every time I have to do quality control, it's a good 30 minutes or hour out of my day. So I try to do it once. So usually when they send me stuff, I'll critique things visually, I'll give them visual art direction, but I generally only jump into Unity and Maya and start inspecting their try count and all that kind of stuff towards the end. And then there's making payments that can actually take up a chunk of your day too. All right, art careers, choices. I've gone through your brochure. You guys seem to have an AIE as a broad understanding of what that is. When I speak to freelancers or new artists, artists that want to be maybe in-house, most of the time people don't know what they want to be. I don't know where you guys are on that spectrum, if you've set on, you know what you're going to be, or if you're just trying to learn the tools and see what job you can land. It's a very important question you need to sort of cover, and I'll touch on it in a moment. But yeah, so concept art from environments, characters, building, props. to environment and level design that's sitting in Maya or sitting in Unity and actually building the levels with the assets we provide. So I'll just get a team of guys to make foliage, and we've got a guy that sits there and he sculpts the terrain and he places the foliage and he paints the grass, and I'll sit with him and we'll talk about how to make that environment interesting. So you can, I'll touch on it later, but you essentially have to, you can't just have a cool desert area and a cool forest area and that's it. You have to have areas where you make the player feel claustrophobic, you restrict their movement, they have to go through thin passages or whatever it is, there's rocks, and you force them to make navigation decisions, give them branches, then to areas where it's open vista. And that kind of contrast leads to visual interest. So that's quite an important job. There's sculpting, modeling, texturing, rigging, skin weights. That's separate. So generally we have a rig done, and then after we have a rig done, we'll probably get a whole bunch of different models done, and we'll have them, the skin weights done to the original rig. So rigging's done in the beginning, but a lot of skin weights is done afterwards. Animation, UI, the sprites, and we've also got a guy that does our trailers for us, he's in-house, and you can get a job as an art manager. All right, specialize. What is your role? So I touched on that earlier. That's just a picture from Wolf Tales. That's when I just, we were using an in-game screenshot for the splash screen when the game starts. So I painted that. We used it for about a month and then we stopped using it. So you've got to be used to that. You might work on something and it might take you a lot of work to do. I don't do splash screens, but I decided, hey, I'm a little bit tired of painting with people. I want to paint. So I decided to paint this. Compared to what we got from one of the other freelancers, it was, I could comfortably say it was better, but it's still not at the level of what our dedicated splash screen artists can do. But at least I knew it was better than what we received from another freelancer. So I'm like, hey, I can do better. I painted it. We used it for a month, and then we ended up using something else. So just be okay with not seeing your work used. Concept artists go through that a lot as well. You'll do a whole bunch of concepts, you'll be attached to them, and then maybe they don't use them. Okay, so generalist, there's more job opportunities, streamlined studio workflow. It's easier working with a generalist. You give him an asset, he's going to kind of come up with a concept, he's going to model it, he's going to texture it, he's going to rig it, and he'll give it to you. That's cool for pipeline. It also gives you management opportunities. You understand the whole pipeline, so you can then easily migrate into an art manager or art director's job if you're a generalist. But you are spread thin, and you have to learn more. If you want to have a burnout and a mental meltdown, go to be a generalist, because you have to know everything. That's the fact. So you can learn everything to a basic level and get away with it, but that's where you're competing against a specialist. You have somebody that can do it better. So that's what I did, but then you get the person that's dedicated, all they do every day is splash screen, but they'll just totally kill me. They'll only just devour me, because I don't do that every day. So they basically just sitting there punching a wall all day. They've got their 1-inch punch, and that's all they practice all day. And they just destroy you when you try to punch them. So there's less juggling as a specialist, and you have more confidence because you know your task. Man, it feels good to know something and know it well. It really sucks to kind of still learn things on the job and troubleshoot and stuff. When you've encountered certain problems, not even talking about the basics, like certain troubleshooting that you encounter, it feels really, really good to know when you encounter them again, I know how to solve that. And when you're a specialist, you get that more often than when you're a generalist, because there's far more problems to try to figure out and solve. But it can become linear, and it can box you in. So sometimes people that become a concept artist later on will migrate over to something else 8 years later, or someone that does modeling might migrate over to texturing, or that does happen. And you can find your place. So sometimes I have freelancers that can't do animals or fantasy assets at all. I'll give them a brief, and it really, really looks bad. I was going to show you guys examples, but that's not fair on the artist. But you clearly see, like, anybody would see, like, that's not good. But that very same artist kills at doing clothing and outfits. Kills. So if you're not good at something, you're probably good at something else. So don't feel discouraged. All right. Common mistakes that artists make. This is a quick list, but I see this one coming in. They forget to use initiative. they receive the brief, and their goal is just to tick off the things on the brief, but sometimes you need to take your head out of that point 1, point 2, point 3 and view it as your own project. Okay, cool. I want to rig this character, not the client wants to rig this character, or and you would probably start thinking, oh, but I could probably do this differently, and then push back on your client saying, you want to do it this way, but you probably want to go that way. That's a good thing. Use initiative, push back on your client, or on the studio or your teammates. Come up with better solutions. Work smart, not hard. I had a freelancer work on something for 6 weeks. It was a 2-day job. So he was just working hard. He wasn't working smart. He made several mistakes. It was like 56 assets he had to go and edit and outfits. It was grunt work, and instead of testing his workflow on one asset, he did all of them. And you find out he did it wrong. Do it all again. Test your workflow. If you're trying out a new technique, try it on a small piece. If you're trying out hair with hand-painted texturing on in PBR workflow, marrying the two, and you're doing hair, just do one piece of the hair. Don't do it all. Don't do the mane and tail and the horse, and you realize it's not exactly right. Do a small chunk. Just do a small chunk. It's easier. That's why if you make mistakes, and you can just adapt for small investment. Use clear and strong theming. When we do concepts, sometimes I'll look at a concept and I'm not sure if that creature belongs under the sea or in the desert. Just because it's got nice colors and nice textures, but I don't know where this thing belongs. It doesn't always have to be so like this obvious trope of, oh, it's a marine character or whatever. You can subtly suggest it, but there needs to be a very clear theme. Try to always use a very, very clear theme. That's something that freelancers struggle with often. They'll take a whole bunch of concepts of things that they like, Frankenstein them together, but they're competing with one another, and I'm not sure where this character wants to go left or right. Avoid copyright claims. There's a saying that there's no original ideas anymore, so even if you look at game design itself, we're generally building on things that we've seen before, and we're coming up with new ideas, but we're building from things that's influenced us. Same thing with art. Always use 3 different references at a given time. Never look at one thing and say, I like this character, I'm going to make a character similar to, you know, Samus or Link from Zelda, and you've got this one image and you're creating your own character. Work from 2 or 3, and if you're busy doing a wolf and you want to do a fantasy wolf, go look at fantasy bears. That way, you guarantee you're not going to replicate their work because you're working on a total different. Your reference is a different animal completely. But you know, we still use wolves. If you're going to do a wolf, just make sure you use 3 different sources of inspiration. Understand the technical limitations of the project. Sometimes you might want to do things that are technically superior, but the project maybe it's not compatible with the project. I'm going to check time here. So I've got 12 minutes left, so I'll jump back quickly.
Big over.
You can run over if you want to go for an hour.
Where we at? Visual hierarchy, focal point. Hopefully you guys understand what visual hierarchy is, but I'll run through it. From graphic design, we understand it a lot. You generally want somebody to look at, this is where you want them to look. And when they're done looking at that, you want them to look at this. And when they're done looking at that, you want them to look at this, so A, B, and C. So visual hierarchy applies to characters too. Like a character's eyes, it's A, and then you go B and C. If you're looking at an animal as a whole, generally their head is first, then B and C. So just know where your focal points are. If you put something that's as loud as the face, they compete, and it's actually unpleasant to look at the thing because they're both shouting at you at the same time. So just understand your visual hierarchies. You can make 2 things beautiful, just make one more. Visual interest, it links directly back to visual hierarchy. It's things you can use to draw a person's eye to something. So saturation, you can make some, and you should do this. You don't want a character that's completely saturated where they look like they just belong in a rave. They're just glowing like a glow stick because they're just fully saturated. You want some pockets of saturation and some pockets of desaturation, and you can use the pockets of saturation to draw the viewer's eye to something. Same thing with value and exposure. You can make something deeper and darker shadows to draw somebody's eye somewhere, and you can. Something actually artists make a mistake often is a lot of times that contrast, that difference between light and dark values, it's quite muted, and I have to push back on freelancers saying, no, separate the lights and darks, make them more distinct. It's almost as if artists are too scared to make their art that distinct. It's just a common mistake, I see it a lot. Use detail in some areas and less detail in other areas. So I guess I'll give you another example. If you're painting a character, an eagle or a griffin, and it's got feathers, sometimes you just have to suggest feathers in certain areas. You don't have to paint individual feathers over the whole thing. It looks very noisy. So just suggest pockets of feathers, and the other areas you can have kind of subtle noise and subtle detail. But yeah, don't overload the model with just feathers. It looks strange. If you want to have exercise, put the two together, you'll see the one that's better. And with when you're doing things, use you want diversity in your detail. So you want some areas that has sharp, crisp lines, and some areas that are soft and smooth. Once again, you're just adding visual interest to increasing your vocabulary. That's very important. If you use sharp detail on everything, or if you make everything look blurry and feathered and muddy, it doesn't work. Put them together, your eye is just having like a field day. It's just like there's so much to look at. It's not monotonous. Silhouette, composition. Revisit your work with fresh eyes. So often I've had this. I will create a piece of art and I'll think it's amazing. I'm literally so stoked. Like, oh, it's amazing. I'll even sometimes submit it. And the next morning I'll come to my desk and I'll look at it and the thing is hideous. It's absolutely gross. So sometimes just delay submitting your work unless you're on a heavy deadline. Or maybe show a colleague. And just by showing and walking around, I used to do, before I did games, I did cartoon characters for kids fashion. I used to illustrate these characters and I'd walk around and because I was asking for my colleagues' feedback, I didn't feel that sensitive about it. And I would tell them, what don't you like about it? Don't tell me what you like about it, tell me what you don't like. And I'd have a list of, say, 30 things that people think that they can improve on the character, and I look at the common denominators and I'll go change those. But yeah, fresh eyes. And the difference between feedback and changes. So often freelancers or artists, I keep saying freelancers because I work with a lot of freelancers. I'm going to say artists, I'll use the word artist instead. So often artists don't understand the difference between feedback and changes. Feedback is when the art manager or art director points out things that you could have done better, and you as an artist should have picked up on that yourself. You're supposed to have the critical eye to pick up, okay, that doesn't look right, that looks off. Maybe some of the points that I pointed out earlier, you should have picked up on. So feedback is when the art director is assisting you, but in many ways doing your job. They're saying, oh, you failed to do this, check this out. Changes is when the art manager or art director will say, we changed our mind, we want something different. We said we want wings, take the wings off. So often artists, when they receive feedback, get frustrated or defensive over their work, especially if it's been several rounds and they maybe they're working on the key character of the game and it's 3 weeks into the project, 3 months, and they're working on it and there's feedback. That artist can feel frustrated, like, oh man, they feel like they suck and they feel like they want to work on something new, and they get frustrated with the feedback. But that's the end of the day, the frustrations are misdirected. Instead of owning that it's taking long because they failed to work on their craft and identify these things, the frustration is redirected to the person that's just observing the mistakes. So when receiving feedback, obviously own it. Own it. That the reason why you're getting the feedback is because you haven't picked up on what they're picking up. Unless you're working with somebody that's being malicious, but whatever, that's not the case. Changes, just understand the difference between those. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Okay. Okay, quality control. These are just basic things. So here you can just see this horse has been, skin weight's been done with this horse. At a glance, you put the horse in the game, it looks great, but under certain poses, certain animations, that goes right through the geometry. And this is submitted work by a freelancer, then I would go back and give feedback, not changes, and I'll say, you can do it better. So there's some common things that I check for. And this is more for production than art. So for production, just make sure when you're modeling, if you're doing unlit textures, or just generally, it's best to set your faces to smooth, especially if you're using low poly models. If it's not set to smooth, it shows all the facets. You get away with a lot when you set it to smooth. It should be a general thing. You can just say under your export settings on the Maya, just set to smooth. Now and again, I get models from artists that are not set to smooth. You put it in the game, and you can just see when the light hits all those different facets. It looks like a Lego character. Modeling using quads. Unity automatically converts your quads into tries, so you don't need modeling tries. When you're modeling quads, it's easier to edit it. You can put edge loops and stuff. Modeling quads is just more efficient and non-destructive. Test LOD transitions. If you're doing LODs for your model, so when it's viewed from a certain distance, hopefully everyone knows what LOD is. Okay, so just test them out. Sometimes the jump between your one tricount and the other is so jarring that it's really damaging. It doesn't have to be that way. And just check that when you're doing LODs, just have your UV editor open, and when you're done, and just check and hop between LOD 0, 1, and 2, and make sure your UVs still look the same. There'll be less, obviously, edges in your UVs, but your outside border should still be the same. So often when people do LODs and they change their models, they delete the edges of the border edges, and it messes up the UVs, and your textures are not going to work. So just check your UVs. Combine similar geometry components. So if you've got a saddle and you've got, let's just say there's a whole bunch of components here. Don't merge them, but you might combine them. It's better for optimization. So the Unity just loads that in once. Instead of loading in 10 objects, it just loads in one object. We do keep them sometimes separate because in the game you can turn things off. But if you know it's going to be a set, you can combine everything. Just go to Maya and just say combine. It's better for optimization. Correctly place your pivot points. So often pivot points are not placed in the right place. So the saddle's pivot point will be here on the ground, center in Maya. Unless the developer asks it to be on the ground. Freeze or transform. Sometimes when you created something and you move it into place, you forget that it's got all that history, and that can cause problems. So just go and modify freeze transform, so just set it all to 0 in its new position. Monitor your try counts. Just work according to what the project's try count is. So often artists go way too high. And it's not very often that I see artists go too low. It's not really a problem. It's normally too high. Once in 3 years, 3.5 years, I've ever seen one artist go too low. And make sure your seams are not set to sharp. Sometimes that'll create a seam in the model. We couldn't figure out what on earth it was, but it was just a seam set to sharp. Textures only export with transparency when needed. It makes the PNG larger. You just tick transparency. Ensure your textures have dilation. You guys know what dilation is? No? Okay. Dilation is essentially, in printing, you would use bleed. So if you're printing a Magic the Gathering card, they'll leave a little bit of extra on the side, so when they cut it off, you won't see the white of the paper. That's printing. In digital gaming, we use dilation. It's also a bit of a color bleed. Why we use it is 2 examples. Easy example is if there's a feather, normally you have transparency around the feather. That's kind of like, think of it as Unity cutting out the feather out the paper and it's chucking the rest away, so there's transparency. But when you view that feather just from a little bit away in Unity, whatever color was right next to your cutting edge, wherever your alpha is, it sometimes reveals a few of those pixels. Just seep through. Whatever was masked by your alpha, just a few pixels sneak through. And if you've got white there, you get this funny white little edge. I think I might actually have spotted something here. It's not that bad. You see that little bit of an edge there? Mm-hmm. Someone used light pink, and you'd see it very clearly if they used, you can see it there. There, there's white seeping through. They didn't use dilation. There's just white seeping through. Just on the edges. Hopefully everyone can see it. Yeah. Use ambient light for your AO bakes. Smoothness maps, when you're doing smoothness maps in PBR, don't just make them gray or white or black if you want something to be shiny, glossy or not glossy or matte. You can just do that as a procedural fill in Unity. So don't go waste the whole map on just the flat form. You can just assign that attribute to it. If you are creating a smoothness map, just add some detail. So if you're doing a rock, add some areas that can enhance the detail. If you're doing hair, when you look at someone's hair and light hits it, there's a shine and it picks up all the hair follicles. Paint those follicles into your smoothness map or roughness map, depends what engine you're using. Animations ensure rigs hierarchies match the model. That's a big problem. I'll just move on and won't leave that. Don't embed the model in your animation. So when you export an animation, don't leave the model in the animation. Generally for gaming, you'll have the model and different animation files. So we've already got the model. Don't have to reinsert the model in your animations as well. It's just making the file bigger and loading the project. And ensure that the z-axis is forward and check for flipping. All right, now the technical stuff. Burnout versus distraction. What was the last one? So that was a horse from HRT, and that is a dragon from Wolf Tales. It's a companion you can get, and later on in the game, we made that you can actually get the dragon and play the adult version with the dragon, play as that dragon. So that aside, burnout. So this is. I'll read this, and it sounds silly, and I'll tell you why it's not. It's still silly, but truth behind it. So don't take on too much. So if you already have a full-time job while volunteering as a writer for the company, along with studying on the side, don't still try to start a Kickstarter project while you're renovating your home and you're being a wizard GM for your local role-playing sessions. It's too much, you'll burn out, and that's me. I've had to cut things out. I no longer write for the company. I've just said no thanks. I've stepped down as GM for my role-playing sessions. I'm now a player. Don't take on too much. Burnout isn't just being tired. Burnout is your brain saying, I'm not playing for a long time. So if you've never experienced burnout will take you a while to recover. Just don't get there. And there's the contrast to that is distraction. One can easily then default to sort of the polar opposite, and you can sort of escape reality with no thought of growth for your future. So that's sort of, you just kick back and take it easy, but you're not going to be able to grow as fast, and it's not as rewarding, and you might even have regret on your time. You'll look back, the last 5 years of my life was spent playing WoW, and my buddy's working for Blizzard, but I'm playing WoW. There's a difference. It's not a long-term solution. So there's balance. It's the middle ground, live a balanced life. So there are seasons where you work harder and the seasons where you're more relaxed, but try to get a consistency. And you probably won't be able to achieve this, but it's deliberate. Try to get 8.5 hours sleep, because usually the first half an hour you're just lying staring at your ceiling. But get 8 hours sleep because you're more functioning, you're better artists for it. Trust me on that. And just stay hydrated. Art fuel, stay inspired. That's an artist that I enjoy. His name's Carl Kapinski. That's me sitting on my dehydrated grass in my backyard. That's when I had burnout. And I went to sit down and I just opened up my favorite artist's book and I was just looking at his art. And I'll touch on something now about that. But look at other people's art to stay inspired. Buy art books, the art of Breath of the Wild, the art of whatever game you enjoy, Final Fantasy or whatever it is, and reignite the passion. So it's art books, podcasts, listening to other artists talk about how they got into the industry is very invigorating. Interviews, do tutorials. Funny enough, read novels. There'll be stories in there, and you might want to convert that story into a game or into a character concept. So sometimes it's not even directly linked to your profession, but audiobooks, movies, just going outdoors, that can have a knock-on effect on inspiring you. You can be inspired at any moment. So don't think if you're watching a movie or reading a book or playing a game that you're wasting your time, but don't obviously overdo it. So there's also fuel versus discouragement. You can look at other people's art, it's 3D sculpts, it's texturing, it's modeling, whatever it is, and you can get discouraged. Don't view it as an artist, view it as a fan. View their work as a fan, just see those, like when you play a game, most of the time you view it as a fan. You're not looking at the game thinking, oh wow, how did they achieve that? You're just looking at that saying, wow, it's amazing. And that fuels you to want to go do something like that. If you view it as an artist, you think, there's no way I'm going to be that good. How on earth would that guy do that? And it's discouraging. So view it as a fan. And then stay inspired and avoid the dips because the technology will get out of it. Art style. So the main thing is choosing your art parents. Mark knows who my art parents are, and we share the same art parents. We're related. Basically, I really like John Howe's work. He's a pencil artist, he's a concept artist. He's done most of the illustrations for the Lord of the Rings books, along with Alan Lee. And they've worked as concept artists in the film. So if you like Smark's design or a lot of the elves designs, they did them. And that is them. They actually, there's John Howe and Alan Lee. They did cameos in the movie. They were the ring rats. So funny fact. And I really enjoy Carl Kopinski's work. That's Carl Kopinski. He's a Warhammer artist. He's done work on Assassin's Creed and other games. And there's a whole bunch of other people. Heinrich Clay, Thomas Elliott, there's Ian McCraig, Debbie. So choose art parents, look at art that you would like to replicate, and formulate this group of artists that you would love, that they would sort of adopt you and teach you their skills. Yeah, it's super important to know your art parents. It's almost like the reality is it's your destination. If you don't have art parents, you don't really know where you're going. Know your destination, know what you're aiming for, and strive for that. And then they'll be able to teach you and hold your hand and guide you and give you a benchmark and images and examples to replicate. So they give you a destination and they show you how to get there. When trying to figure out your art style, if it's sculpting, you'll be surprised how many stylized approaches you can have to just sculpting something. You can do something very realistic, you can do very stylized, and there's many ways of doing something stylized. So that doesn't just apply to concept art, doesn't just apply to texturing, doesn't just apply to, it's across the board. And generally, style comes from limitation. So if you look back in history, Disney style, the cell shading style, came from a limitation. They painted with few colors because it was quicker, but they bred a whole new style. A lot of times, look at how games were originally made with pixels. There was limitation on the game, the computer's hardware. I was born in 1982. I grew up with pixel art games, and on that note, I love it because it basically forces you to participate in the game while you're playing it, because you are formulating the full picture. It's giving you, it was like a mosaic, it's showing you a few of the pixels, and you are seeing it as a full character. But that's digressing. But yeah, limitation breeds design, and function and purpose of your art. Ask yourself that question, because that sometimes also defines what you're going to do and what the style of the art is, and playing to your strengths. So if you enjoy drawing people, and if you're drawing people, then draw people. Bonus tips: bubblegum wrapper. So, you guys have chappies in Australia? You know what those are? We had bubblegum in South Africa that when you open it up, it has all these funny facts on the inside of the wrapper. It's like a 5-cent little bubblegum, but it gives you life.
Fantails maybe?
Say again?
Fantails maybe? Movie facts on all of that.
Yeah. So basically, bonus tips is throw 10 minutes at your art daily. Generally, we are discouraged to jump in because just getting started, it just feels like, I must boot up Unity and it boot up Maya and get Substance Painter going. It's like a negative gatekeeper. But if you convince yourself just to throw 10 minutes at it and think, I can do that. 10 minutes is a small investment. You'll find you normally work on it longer than 10 minutes. 3 hours go by because you're so invested. So rather, if you think, I just want to go play Uncharted, or I just want to go play whatever, just say, I'll throw 10 minutes at my art before I do that. It's 10:30, and you're like, that was a good time well spent. Maybe I'll play Uncharted tomorrow, and you do that again. Level design, we spoke about already, claustrophobia versus open distance, contrast. When it comes to game design, I'm touching on these things because most studios, you'll be surprised how much influence you have on things that are not art related. Sometimes there isn't a dedicated person in certain roles because the team shares that responsibility, and it's good for you to have a strong voice, not for your sake, but for the team's sake, make good games. In game design, consequences drive your player to make engaging choices. If there's no consequences, if you're playing Pac-Man and the ghosts are not chasing you, and you don't die when they bite you, But the premise of the game is still the same. Collect all the pebbles on the screen, but no consequences. It's not fun. So many times, game designers forget to utilize consequences. And sometimes they put in consequences that are not that helpful. Sometimes the consequences are you just spawn again, and they'll take a bit of your currency away. But you basically, the amount of currency they take away from you doesn't even hurt. And you spawn with full health, there's no debuff. You go back to the boss you were just fighting, he just killed you. You go back to him and he's half health because you have hurt him, and you kill him. You did not deserve that kill. You don't even feel, how can I say, proud of that kill, because you know that you failed forward, you fell forward to the game. They're making games easier nowadays. That's a different topic. Game design, optional participation, something I can vouch for with my kids. If you want to get someone to do something, make it optional and then watch how quickly they do it. We've learned a lot about that from game design. So the reason why people will play games where they're basically emulating having a job, but they'll have fun doing it because it's optional, and they use visual feedback. So it's you're giving the person's brain the endorphins of achieving something, but in a 5-minute session or a 10-minute session. Life, sometimes you need to study something for 3 years before you get that endorphin in your brain, like, cool, I finished graduating. Games give that to you in a shorter study. There's many things. Life doesn't give you a progress marker, games do, and the brain just loves that sense of accomplishment. But the fact is, it's optional. So games are challenging, games are hard, but they're fun because they're optional. Game design, don't just copy other people, what they're doing. Films are making the same mistake. Hollywood, they've found a winning formula. Investors just want to do the same thing because it's safe, and it's turning out not to be a good thing. Too many games are the same. That's why the indie games, where they were just sort of not relying on investors or big corporates to lock them in. They were really sitting in their room designing the game that they thought would be fun. That's why indie games exploded. That's why, not just because the game developers wanted to do it and it was great for game developers, consumers, it exploded because the consumers wanted it. So innovate and pioneer because the consumers wanted it. Story, understand the formula. So just if you're going to have a voice in the team about story, or if you even creating art and you want to understand who your characters are, understand the story formula. Basically, the 3-act structure. Understand the difference between what the character wants and what they need to do. Like Monsters Inc., Sully wants to be the top mascara, but what he has to do is risk his job, and that's what he needs to do. He needs to risk his job, and everything goes downhill. But that's what you need to do. So it's the characters want and they need normally conflict with one another, and that makes it engaging. So that you watch the character process. But yeah, focus on characters as well. Characters are interesting. People can get the story, they remember the characters, and you set up and pay off often. So just allude to something and then later on touch on it again, and it's very rewarding. Life studies. So if you're doing that for your sculpts, if you're learning human anatomy, or if you're just doing studies of master studies, you're trying to replicate the Blizzard hand-painted style, or you're trying to replicate the Zelda textures, it's a great opportunity to unwind, and it's an attainable win. You don't have to come up with the concept. If you're doing life studies, you're just replicating someone else's anatomy. It's all there in front of you. You don't have to do a lot of think work. It's just lay back. Same thing when you're doing a master study, you're looking at someone else's textures that you really like, and you're just replicating the work. You don't have to sit there trying to do a lot of design work. It's very therapeutic, and it's an attainable win. And it's good for your morale, so do that more often than not. And don't be so attached to your work. That can stifle you if you're very attached to your work. You're very close-fisted. Your work, it becomes very tight, very stiff, very rigid, because you just putting so much emphasis on how great this must be, versus just jumping into it very gesturally and just it's funny how often in moments that you least expect to create your best work. So when you sit down thinking on best art piece, sometimes it's not. It's the time where you're like, oh, I've got 2 hours to kill, and you create something, you put it online, and it just completely explodes. yeah, true insecurity shows in your work. So, it sounds strange, but insecurity is not attractive in art. It shows. If you're a bit hesitant with how you're sculpting or how you're drawing, how you're texturing, how you're animating, if you're playing it safe and you're a little bit worried, and be bold. Confidence is actually attractive when you can see it in someone's work. Press complete, we've reached the end. So there's HRT, that's one of our games. There's Dino Tamers, there's Wolf Tales, and there's Virtual, I'm very bad at this, Virtual Sim Story. I've worked on all of them. I was extremely involved in the first three, and the last one I just did the character design. And I was art manager on the model and all the hairs in the game. But that's where my involvement ended. I wrote the story for these two, and I wrote the pet story for that, and I was the art director for the three of them. How to get hired. This is why you're listening to me. Have a focused portfolio. It's good to show you can do everything, but amongst all of that, you probably need to ask yourself, which one do I enjoy the most, and which one am I the best at? And generally, when you look at a portfolio, if somebody is doing everything, they're probably doing everything okay. And if you're looking at a whole bunch of portfolios and you want to hire somebody to do animation, and you're looking at guys, they're going to destroy you. You don't stand a chance. So it's great to understand everything. It does open doors for you, like we covered earlier. But still, within that, choose something that you maybe want to shine in and focus on that. Follow current trends. Just don't be disconnected on what's happening in the world. Don't still be doing pixel art when maybe the world's moved on. But I still say do pixel art. But follow trends. Pixel art comes back and forth. Maybe you'll start a trend. Be a pioneer. Do pixel art when no one else is. Stand out and be different. That's my point. Use websites like Polycount or similar. Go look for jobs. But don't burn out. But at the same time, be proactive. Become an influencer. Teach. If you're sitting on a project and you've just figured something out, put a video online. Screen share. It helps you remember it. Remember what you just figured out. It's kind of like your own little diary. But create a channel, and just every time you learn something new, just screen record, talk over what you just learned, capture that in your own little blog. But at the same time, become an influencer. Teach. Start a passion project. So many times I got hired just after I've done a passion project. So I will say, I'm a little bit bored of my current job. I'd love to work on whatever it is. I'll start doing it on the side, because now I've got a hunger to do that thing. So I'll just assign myself a task, even if it's a make-believe task. It's my own little project. And maybe I'll do a vertical slice where it's just part of the project. I'm not doing the whole scope of the game or the animation. It's just a vertical slice of the story and the character design and all that stuff. I put that online, and when I apply for a job 6 months or 12 months later, they give me the job and they say, we hired you because of what we saw in your portfolio. It's that one project, and that's happened. And I can vouch for that. Visit Foxy Games' website. We advertise jobs on there frequently, or just camp out at Game Plus. I've hired someone recently, so he's camping out at Game Plus. So you get hired. If anyone wants a portfolio review, you can just drop me an email. I won't be able to mentor you, but I can at least give you feedback on what you can improve on and what I think your strengths are. Parthian shot. Anyone know what a Parthian shot is? You do?
It's a shot you fire when you're leaving an argument, isn't it?
Yeah. So
you think you're walking away from it.
Exactly. Yeah. It's been shortened to parting shot. Mm-hmm. So it's something you say on your way out. So this is my Parthian shot. Backlog. Something most of us can relate to is a Steam library backlog. So the markets are oversaturated with games, and it's impossible to consume them all. Yet the consumer demand for new content fuels market growth. There's a sense of human pack mentality where when something gets released and it is intriguing and you do want to find out more about it and there's hype, there's a sense of you don't want to miss out on that because that's going to be the conversation, and there's just a sense of FOMO, fear of missing out, or on something memorable or what other people are talking about. That's why people go to the cinema to watch a new movie when it comes out, because there's just a sense of control there. So the same applies to art, trends, software, and requirements. You can sometimes feel like you can't keep up with technology. You've just learned how to paint the textures, and now your client says, hey, we're doing PBR on the next project. Art's very similar to that, where you generally can sometimes not be able to keep up with what's being produced or what's required or new technologies. But with both entertainment and art, one can always look to the past. Those that came before us, it's kind of like locked in history. It's never going to change. It's not going to evolve or expand. It's a constant. And you'll be surprised what new things you learn when you go back. So you're looking at older games, looking at how they made games. Funny enough, we're doing those very same things in mobile, because mobile's got the same limitations. The original mobile had the same limitations PlayStation had, or the Nintendo 64. Current mobile games are running at the same equivalent with PS3 at the moment, in my opinion. But it kind of gets sad, because now mobile, you can start doing whatever you want, and it's fun working within restrictions. Restrictions breeds creativity.